HOA stole my road without permission, so I made sure their cars disappeared. It was a quiet morning. I was sipping my coffee, watching the sunrise, when I saw the sign right there in front of my house. The HOA had just stolen my road, and they didn't even ask. They told me it was for community use, but they never bothered to get my consent. And that's when I decided to take action. But I didn't just fight back. I made sure they'd never forget who they were messing with. One by one, every single car disappeared. No trace, no evidence, and no explanation. But here's the thing. Who would do such a thing? Who could pull it off? Let's find out. Welcome to HOA Unit. I'm Random Male Name, and I live right here in this suburban neighborhood where the rules are meant to be followed, or else. I'm just a regular guy, or at least I was until the HOA crossed the line. I've lived in this neighborhood for years, and I've seen how power trips can ruin communities. But this was personal. So stick around, because today I'm going to tell you exactly how I took control when the HOA thought they could just take whatever they wanted. Let's dive into the story. The day had started like any other, but something felt different. The morning air was still and quiet. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, ready to take in the calm of my neighborhood. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow on the streets. Then I saw it. A sign, right there at the end of my driveway. Private property. HOA use only. I froze. I couldn't believe it. The HOA, without any warning, had taken my road. My road. The one I paid for and maintained for years. I had always kept my distance from the HOA like everyone else. But this felt personal. No notice, no warning. Just a sign slapped in front of my property. I walk by it closer, my coffee now forgotten in my hand. I tried to make sense of it. For community use, it said. Community use? This wasn't some shared space. This was my road, my private road. I took a step back and looked around. The quiet neighborhood I once loved now felt strange, even hostile. I knew the HOA had power, but I never thought they'd do something like this. I stood there, staring at the sign, my mind racing. What right did they have? How could they just take it without asking? I thought about going straight to the HOA office, confronting them, but I knew what would happen. They'd give me the same old speech. We're doing this for the good of the community. Blah, blah, blah. But this time, it was different. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not this time. I stood there for a moment longer, trying to calm myself. But it was impossible. The frustration, the anger, it bubbled up inside me. I felt helpless. But only for a moment. I was determined to do something about it. I started walking back toward my house, my eyes never leaving that sign. It felt like everything was changing. As I reached the front door, I heard my neighbor, Mr. Larson, shouting from across the street. He was holding a letter. It was one of those official-looking HOA notices. "You seen this?" he yelled. "They're saying we can't park in front of our own homes anymore. They're starting to enforce the rules about street parking." I shook my head, confused. "What? Are they serious?" He nodded, his face flushed with anger. "They think they can just take whatever they want. They're pushing us all around. I'm done with them." I felt a chill run down my spine. What had I gotten myself into? Mr. Larson's words echoed in my head. The HOA had always had too much power, but this felt like they were taking it too far. The next few days were a blur. Every time I stepped outside, there it was. That sign, staring back at me. I couldn't escape it. The HOA's control was suffocating, creeping into every corner of my life. It was like living under constant surveillance, like they were waiting for me to slip up, to break some rule. But I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I kept my head down for a while. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. The more I realized I wasn't the only one they were pushing around. The entire neighborhood was feeling it. One evening, as I sat on my porch, I saw the HOA president, Mrs. Taylor, walking by. She was holding her little clipboard, checking off things on her list as she walked down the street. She always had that smile, that same fake smile, the one that said, "I'm in charge." But her eyes never matched that smile. They were cold, calculating. She looked at me for a moment, then quickly glanced away. I could tell she was avoiding eye contact. Maybe she felt guilty, or maybe she just didn't care. I wanted to say something, to confront her right there, but I knew better. Confronting her head-on wouldn't change anything. The HOA had too much power. They could fine you, harass you, even take you to court if they wanted, and they'd win. So I kept my mouth shut, for now. But in my mind, I was planning something. I didn't know what yet, but I knew I couldn't just sit back and let them have their way. I started paying attention, watching, noticing the little things. Mrs. Taylor had her usual meetings at the community center, and I knew the others on the board weren't any better. They had their little clique, their little kingdom. I noticed the way they walked around, acting like they owned the place. The way they looked down on everyone else, like we were all just peons in their suburban utopia. I couldn't stand it anymore. Something had to give. So I started taking notes. Not just about the road, but everything. The rules they enforced, the way they treated people, the petty little fines they handed out like candy. And then one day, I realized something. I wasn't powerless. They thought they had control over me, over all of us. But what if I could take that control back? What if I could make them regret the day they decided to mess with my road? That's when the plan started to form. But what should I do first? Should I go straight for the head of the snake, or should I start small, work my way up, and watch them squirm? The next few days were the hardest, and the strangest. Every time I stepped out, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The neighbors, who had always been friendly, now seemed distant, cautious even. Maybe they were worried that if they talked to me, they'd be dragged into this mess. But I wasn't the one who'd started it. They had. The HOA had taken my road without asking, without warning, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I decided to get serious. I wasn't going to confront them head on, not yet. That would have been too easy for them to dismiss, too obvious. No, I had to play the long game. I had to be smarter, craftier. If I was going to fight the HOA, I needed to hit them where it hurt. And that meant playing by their rules, while secretly working to destroy their control from within. I started small, observing them more closely. Mrs. Taylor was the easiest target, always walking around with her clipboard, pointing out violations that no one had ever cared about before. A dead leaf on a lawn, a mailbox a few inches too high. Ridiculous things that didn't matter, but to her it was all about control, and I could see it now more than ever. I began to document everything, every fine, every rule they decided to enforce, and every inconsistency in their reasoning. It wasn't hard to find flaws. They were sloppy, careless. They thought they were untouchable, that no one would ever challenge them. But I was watching, and I was patient. Then came the first small victory. I found an email from Mrs. Taylor to another board member where she'd mentioned a secret meeting to discuss new rules. Rules that hadn't been passed through the neighborhood vote, but she was going to push them through anyway. The email wasn't marked as confidential, but it might as well have been. This was gold. I saved it and waited. Then I took action. I made an anonymous tip to the local news station. It wasn't much, just a little whisper in the right ear, but it was enough to get them talking. The next week, a reporter showed up at the community center asking questions about the new rules. Mrs. Taylor tried to play it off, but you could tell she was rattled. It was beautiful. She was no longer in control. But this was just the beginning. The HOA wasn't the only group that could make life miserable for me. I had learned the hard way that every single person who lived in this neighborhood, from the smallest child to the oldest senior, had their own agenda. Everyone was watching, waiting for something to go wrong. And that's when I made my next move. I had noticed something odd, something subtle that no one else had picked up on. Mrs. Taylor always parked in the same spot, right in front of her house. But there was something wrong with her car. It was always locked, always parked just a bit too close to the curb, and if you looked closely enough, you'd see the faintest scratch along the side. At first, I didn't think much of it. People scratch their cars all the time, right? But then, one day, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Taylor wasn't the one getting into the car. It was her assistant, or what I assumed was her assistant. A younger guy, probably in his late 20s. He had dark hair and a nervous look on his face. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, as if someone might be watching him. But the weird part was, when he got in the car, he didn't drive it away. He just sat there for a while. I couldn't make sense of it, not at first, but I knew it had to mean something. I started watching them more closely, and over the next few days I noticed the same pattern. The assistant would show up, get in the car, and sit there. No one ever questioned him, not even Mrs. Taylor. It was as if they had this little secret, something that no one else knew. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to find out what was going on. I followed the assistant one evening after he left the community center. It was risky, but I had to know. I trailed him for a few miles, keeping a safe distance. I was almost sure I had lost him when he suddenly turned into a side street, and there, parked in a garage at the end of the cul-de-sac, was the car. Mrs. Taylor's car. But here's the thing. The garage wasn't hers. It belonged to someone else in the neighborhood, someone who had nothing to do with the HOA, but had always seemed off. I watched, my heart racing. The assistant got out of the car, looked around nervously, and then disappeared into the house. I waited for a few minutes, trying to make sense of it all. Who was this person? Why was the assistant hiding something? The questions flooded my mind. There had to be a connection between Mrs. Taylor and this house. I knew I had to dig deeper. This wasn't just about the road anymore. This was something bigger. I went home that night, my head spinning. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. There was something going on, something that the HOA didn't want anyone to know about, and I was going to find out what it was. But what if I was getting too close? What if I was putting myself in danger? Would I be able to uncover the truth without making a bigger mess? Or was I walking into something I couldn't control? I couldn't stop thinking about the garage and that assistant. Why had he been acting so suspicious? Why had he hidden Mrs. Taylor's car there? I knew something was off, and I was starting to feel like I was in way deeper than I'd intended. But at the same time, the mystery was too enticing. I had to get answers. I spent the next few days watching the house, waiting for something to happen. I didn't want to get too close, didn't want to look too obvious, but I needed to find out what was going on. It was a risky game, but I had come this far. I couldn't back down now. The first breakthrough came on a Wednesday afternoon, around the time the sun began to set. I had been sitting in my car, parked a few houses down, watching the house across the street. And there it was, the assistant again, coming out of the house. This time, he was carrying a large duffel bag. He didn't look around, didn't seem to care who saw him, and for a moment I wondered if I had been overthinking everything. But then he did something strange. He walked straight to Mrs. Taylor's car, the one he had been parking in the garage, and slipped something inside the trunk. After a quick look around, he slammed the trunk shut and walked off, heading in the opposite direction. I waited for what felt like hours before I got out of the car. My mind was racing. What had been in that bag? What was he hiding? Why was he putting something in Mrs. Taylor's car? I wasn't sure what to do next, but I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't afford to let Mrs. Taylor catch on. I started walking toward the house, trying to look casual, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. When I passed the garage, I stopped just long enough to glance inside. The door was slightly cracked, and through the gap, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A stack of documents. Not just any documents, though. I could see that they were official looking, with the HOA logo stamped on the top. I had seen those papers before. Fines, notices, rules, everything the HOA used to control the neighborhood. But these papers were different. These weren't just notices. These were plans. Plans to renovate the neighborhood. Plans that went far beyond what anyone had agreed to. My heart started to race. My gut told me I was looking at something dangerous. Something that could destroy the whole community. I didn't think twice. I had to know more. The next evening, I decided to go back under the cover of darkness. It was risky, but it was the only chance I had to figure out what was really going on. I snuck back to the house, careful to keep my movements quiet. When I got to the garage, I saw that the door was still cracked open. This time, there was no assistant in sight. I stepped closer, trying to stay in the shadows. The documents were still there. I grabbed one quickly, careful not to make a sound. As I unfolded it, I felt my pulse quicken. It was a blueprint of the entire neighborhood. But there was something on it that caught my eye. A section of land, a section marked for HOA expansion. The neighborhood was going to change. Big time. This wasn't just about my road anymore. This wasn't just about petty fines or the rules. The HOA was planning to expand, to take even more control, to develop areas of the neighborhood that no one had ever agreed to. I couldn't believe what I was reading. This was huge. This was illegal. I couldn't even wrap my head around it. I shoved the blueprint into my jacket and made my way back to my car, my mind racing. The HOA had been planning this all along, and now it made sense. The road, the rules, the fines. It was all part of a bigger picture. They were taking control of everything. But I wasn't about to let that happen. As I drove home that night, I couldn't help but think about what I had uncovered. The neighborhood was on the brink of a major change, and the HOA wasn't going to stop until they had full control. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Not if I could help it. The next day, I made a plan. It was risky, but I had to expose what the HOA was doing before it was too late. I knew I couldn't do it alone, so I decided to bring in some help. I reached out to a few neighbors who I knew had been frustrated with the HOA for years. Some were hesitant at first, but when I showed them the documents I had found, their eyes lit up. They knew something wasn't right, but now they saw the truth. It was time to take action. I knew the HOA would fight back. They would try to cover their tracks, deny everything, and make it seem like I was the problem. But I had the evidence. I had the truth on my side. We started organizing. We met in secret, planning our next steps carefully. It wasn't going to be easy. The HOA had their claws in deep. But we had one thing they didn't: the truth. I couldn't sleep that night. The blueprint I had found kept spinning in my mind. The HOA's plans for expansion. They weren't just expanding. They were plotting to take over. I thought about it all night. What if I hadn't seen that document? What if the expansion had gone unnoticed? It would have been too late by the time anyone realized what was happening. But now I knew. I had the power. But power comes with a price, doesn't it? I didn't sleep at all that night. And by the time the morning sun broke through the clouds, I had made my decision. I had to act fast, and I couldn't do it alone. The next morning, I contacted a few of my most trusted neighbors, the ones I had seen complaining about the HOA, the ones who had felt the brunt of their petty rules. They had to know what I had found. They had to see the truth. One by one, I got them on board. It wasn't easy. Some of them were hesitant, scared. The HOA had a way of making you feel like you were the problem, like you were the one who was breaking the rules. But the more I showed them, the more they understood. This wasn't about a few fines. This wasn't about a road. It was about something much bigger. We met in secret at night, behind closed doors. We shared everything we knew, piecing it together like a puzzle, and the more we uncovered, the more it became clear. The HOA had been planning this for years. Slowly and methodically, they had been taking control, one step at a time. It wasn't just about the land, it was about power, and power is a dangerous thing in the wrong hands. We spent days planning. We knew that if we went public with what we had, the HOA would try to bury it. They had connections, they had lawyers, but we had something they didn't: the truth. It was time to make our move. The plan was simple. We'd take everything we knew to the media. We had a local reporter who had been sniffing around the HOA for a while. She had been covering the smaller complaints, the petty violations, but she didn't know the full story. I called her, told her everything. She listened, took notes, and promised to help us expose the truth. I could feel the weight of everything shifting. We were going to take them down. But as the days went on, I began to notice something. The HOA was on edge. I could see it in the way Mrs. Taylor walked through the neighborhood, her head down, her eyes scanning everything like she was waiting for something, like she was waiting for me to make a move. She knew I was onto her. The more I watched, the more it became clear. The HOA wasn't just worried about losing control. They were worried about losing everything, and that scared me. They were dangerous when they were cornered, and I wasn't sure how far they'd go to protect their power. I spent the next few days laying low, keeping my head down, but I kept my eyes open, watching for any signs that they were going to strike back, and sure enough, they did. It started with a letter, a threat, really. I woke up one morning to find an envelope on my doorstep. The letter inside was vague, but the message was clear. We know what you're doing. We can make this disappear before you even have a chance to act. It was a warning that the HOA had their sights set on me. They knew I was a threat, and they were ready to do whatever it took to stop me. I didn't back down. In fact, it only made me more determined. I showed the letter to the others, and we decided to move forward. We couldn't let them intimidate us. This wasn't just about one person or one road anymore. This was about all of us, about standing up to the people who thought they could control everything. That evening we met with the reporter again. This time she had some bad news. The HOA had hired a high-powered lawyer. They were threatening to sue anyone who went public with the information. They were trying to scare us into silence. But I wasn't afraid of their threats. Not anymore. I wasn't alone anymore. We were a group now, a team. And together, we were going to fight back. We decided to go ahead with our plan. We knew the risks. But we also knew that if we stayed silent, the HOA would win. They would expand, take more, and control everything. We couldn't let that happen. The next few days were tense. The pressure was building. But then the reporter called me late one night. She had news. Big news. She had managed to get a meeting with the mayor. The mayor had been getting a lot of complaints about the HOA lately, and when she heard about the expansion plan, she agreed to meet with us. This was our shot, our chance to finally take them down. We were going to expose everything, the corruption, the lies, the manipulation, and it was all going to be out in the open. The day of the meeting, I was a bundle of nerves. I had no idea how it was going to go, but I knew we had to make it count. If we didn't, it would all be over. The HOA would crush us, and we'd never get a second chance. We walked into the mayor's office with everything we had: documents, emails, the blueprint, the whole story. It was time to lay it all out. As we sat down and started to explain, I saw something I wasn't expecting. The mayor's face grew pale. She looked at the documents, then back at us, and then she said the one thing I wasn't ready for. The HOA has been doing this for years. No one ever wanted to listen. But this time, it's different. You've got their attention now. It wasn't just about taking down the HOA anymore. It was about uncovering something far bigger. The mayor's words echoed in my head long after the meeting ended. You've got their attention now. But what did that mean? What did we really have on the HOA? A few documents? A blueprint? That wasn't enough. Not yet. I had to be sure, absolutely sure, that we were going to win this fight. As I left the mayor's office, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The stakes were higher now. The HOA was no longer just a neighborhood nuisance. They were powerful, connected, and I had no idea what they were capable of when pushed into a corner. But that wasn't going to stop me. I wasn't going to back down, not after everything I had seen, not after everything we had uncovered. The truth was out there now, and I was ready to expose it. But then the calls started. It started with Mrs. Taylor. She was calm, almost too calm, as she left a voicemail. We know you're going public with this. We can make this go away. You're a reasonable person. You don't want to go down this road. Think about it. I didn't respond. I just listened to her message over and over. The smooth, manipulative tone in her voice. She wasn't just offering a way out. She was threatening me. She was making it clear that the HOA had the power to destroy me, my family, my life, and she wasn't joking. I deleted the voicemail and didn't look back. But deep down, I knew I had crossed a line. The HOA wouldn't stop until they had silenced us. They wouldn't rest until they crushed anyone who dared challenge them. But it wasn't just me anymore. It wasn't just my fight. The whole neighborhood was watching, waiting, and I couldn't let them down. The next day, we had another meeting, this time with our group of neighbors. The reporter had set up a meeting with a local lawyer, someone who had experience dealing with shady organizations like the HOA. We needed to make sure we were ready. We couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. The lawyer was sharp. He wasn't intimidated by the HOA's threats. He looked over everything we had, our documents, the emails, the blueprint, and smiled. This is solid. You've got enough to put a serious dent in their plans. That was the first time in this entire ordeal that I felt a flicker of hope. It was like a light had come on. We had the upper hand. We had the evidence. We had the truth. And now we had someone who could help us fight. But then came the next shock. The HOA wasn't done with us. I came home that afternoon to find my driveway blocked. My car was stuck, unable to get out. At first, I thought it was just some random incident, maybe a neighbor parked too close. But when I got out of the car, I saw it. A note. You can't win. This is bigger than you. Back off. It was signed, the board. The threats were escalating, but I wasn't afraid. I couldn't afford to be. I had to stay focused. I couldn't let them intimidate me. They were trying to control me, trying to make me feel small. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not anymore. As the days went by, the pressure mounted. The HOA seemed to be everywhere, lurking around every corner. Mrs. Taylor's face popped up more and more, like a shadow in the background, watching. The whole neighborhood was on edge. It felt like we were living in a pressure cooker, just waiting for it to explode. But even in the face of all this, we didn't stop. Our meetings became more frequent. The lawyer was on our side, the reporter was ready to break the story, and the neighbors were more committed than ever. We were ready to expose everything. But we still needed one final piece. I had a hunch that the HOA's expansion plans weren't just about the land or the rules they were pushing. There was something deeper, something darker. They had been taking control for years, slowly building their empire in the neighborhood. But what were they hiding? What else had they been doing in secret? I didn't know for sure, but I had a feeling that Mrs. Taylor and the rest of the board weren't just power-hungry bureaucrats. There was something personal about it, something hidden beneath the surface. I started digging again. This time, I wasn't just looking at their plans for the neighborhood. I wanted to know about them, about their pasts, about how they had risen to power. What I uncovered made my stomach turn. It turned out that Mrs. Taylor had a history, one that she had kept hidden, a history that involved questionable business dealings and ties to some unsavory individuals. She had used her position in the HOA to cover up her past, to protect herself from anyone who might uncover the truth. I didn't know how much of this was true, but the more I dug, the more it made sense. She wasn't just running the HOA for power. She was using it to hide something, and that something could be her undoing. But here's the problem. If I exposed her past now, it could ruin everything we had worked for. It could turn the tables in her favor. She'd use the media to spin it against us. It could turn into a full-blown war. So I had a choice to make. Do I expose her dark secrets and risk everything, knowing she'd stop at nothing to retaliate? Or do I hold off, stick to the original plan, and focus on the expansion? It felt like no matter what, we were running out of time. The HOA was getting desperate. I couldn't afford to make the wrong move. I couldn't shake the feeling that the moment was fast approaching. The moment when everything would either fall apart or come together. Mrs. Taylor, the HOA, all of it. They thought they had me cornered. But little did they know, I was playing a much bigger game, and this game was about to change everything. The more I thought about exposing her secrets, the more I realized the stakes were higher than ever. The truth could destroy Mrs. Taylor, but it could also destroy everything we had worked for. If I played my cards wrong, it could give the HOA exactly what they needed to turn the tide in their favor. But if I didn't act, they'd continue to destroy the neighborhood, slowly, methodically, piece by piece. I couldn't just let them win, not like this. So I made the decision. I wasn't going to sit on the sidelines anymore. I couldn't wait for the perfect moment or the right plan. The time to act was now, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. I called the lawyer, told him everything, the plans, the documents, the threats. He listened carefully, asking questions, taking notes. And then he said something that stuck with me. We don't need to expose everything all at once. We just need to hit them where it hurts. The rest will follow. That was the turning point. We didn't need to fight them on every front. We didn't need to expose every secret, every shady deal. We just needed to make them feel vulnerable. We needed to show that we had the power to take away what they valued most, their control. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was possible. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were finally taking control of the situation. The next step was clear. We had to take the fight to the HOA's doorstep, but we couldn't do it alone. We needed the support of the entire neighborhood. We needed everyone who had been affected by the HOA's rules, everyone who had been pushed around or fined for something ridiculous. If we could get them on our side, the HOA wouldn't stand a chance. We started gathering our supporters. It wasn't easy. Some neighbors were still scared. They didn't want to get involved. But the more we talked, the more they started to see the truth. The HOA was no longer just enforcing rules. They were taking control. They were violating our rights. We weren't going to stand for it. The night before we were set to go public, I sat in my living room, staring at the documents spread out before me. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the sound of the house settling. But inside, my mind was racing. Tomorrow, we were going to bring everything to light. The media, the lawyer, the neighborhood. It would all come together. But then, just as I was about to close my laptop, there was a knock at the door. I froze. I didn't expect anyone. I wasn't expecting any more threats from the HOA, at least not this soon. I stood up, hesitated for a moment, and then opened the door. And there, standing in front of me, was Mrs. Taylor. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. For a moment she just stood there, looking at me like she couldn't believe I had the audacity to go through with it. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. But she quickly regained her composure. "You don't understand the consequences of your actions. You're playing with fire, and you're going to burn everyone. Not just you, but everyone in this neighborhood." Her words hung in the air, heavy and threatening, but I didn't flinch. I knew what she was trying to do. She was trying to intimidate me, trying to make me back down. She had always been good at that, at making people feel small. But not anymore. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice steady. "And neither are the people of this neighborhood. We've had enough." I could see the anger in her eyes. She wasn't used to people standing up to her, much less winning. "You'll regret this," she warned, her voice low. "You have no idea what you're getting into. You're a small player in a much bigger game." And just like that, she turned and walked away. I watched her go, my heart pounding. This was it. We were in it now. There was no turning back. The next day, the media came. The reporter was there, her camera crew in tow. The lawyer was ready. The whole neighborhood had gathered in the park, and the air was thick with tension. Mrs. Taylor's threats echoed in my mind, but I couldn't let them control me. I had to stay focused. We started by telling the media the story, the real story. How the HOA had been secretly planning to expand, to take control of more land, to push the community to the edge. We had the documents. We had the proof. It wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was a fact. And then came the twist. As we spoke, a woman from the crowd stepped forward. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her at first. She was holding a folder in her hands. She walked up to the reporter, opened the folder, and handed it to her. The reporter looked down at the papers, then back at the crowd. She gasped. It was a new set of documents that showed how the HOA was planning to sell off parts of the neighborhood for profit. They had been working with a real estate company to turn our homes into luxury condos. The crowd went silent. Mrs. Taylor's game wasn't just about power. It was about money. It was about selling us all out. The moment that woman stepped forward with those new documents, everything changed. The crowd that had been silently watching us, unsure of what to believe, now stood frozen in disbelief. The truth was out. The HOA, led by Mrs. Taylor, had been secretly plotting to sell off the very homes they claimed to protect for a quick profit. I could hear the collective gasp from the crowd as people looked around at each other, processing what they were hearing. The energy in the air was electric, charged with a mixture of shock and fury. It was one thing to fight over roadways and fines, but this was a betrayal of the worst kind. I could see Mrs. Taylor standing off to the side, her face ashen, her arms crossed tightly in front of her. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected us to fight back like this. The power she had worked so hard to build was crumbling right before her eyes. The reporter wasted no time. She held the documents up for the camera, showing them to the crowd. These documents prove that the HOA, under the leadership of Mrs. Taylor, has been secretly working with real estate developers to turn this community into luxury condos, she said, her voice clear and strong. They've been selling the neighborhood out, and none of the residents had a clue. I watched as Mrs. Taylor's face twisted with panic. She tried to step forward, to say something, but the crowd wasn't having it. People started shouting, demanding answers, their voices rising in anger. Some were even taking out their phones, recording every moment. I didn't let myself get caught up in the chaos, though. My eyes were fixed on Mrs. Taylor, watching her every move. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to control the situation. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. She had lost the community's trust, and once that was gone, there was no getting it back. Suddenly, the crowd parted, and someone stepped forward. It was Mr. Larson, my neighbor, the one who had been so vocal about the HOA's power trips. He was holding a microphone, and he wasn't afraid to speak his mind. "This is our neighborhood," he shouted, his voice booming across the park. "And we're done being controlled by a corrupt organization that cares more about money than the people who live here." The crowd erupted in applause. It was like a dam had broken. People were no longer afraid to speak up. They were no longer afraid of Mrs. Taylor and the HOA. I couldn't help but smile. We had done it. We had exposed the truth. And now, we were taking back what was rightfully ours. But the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Mrs. Taylor was already backing away, her eyes darting around, looking for an escape. She had no more words. She had no defense. The truth had shattered her carefully constructed world. "I don't need to say much," I said, stepping forward and addressing the crowd. "You've all seen the truth for yourselves. The HOA has been lying to us, taking advantage of us, and now they've been caught. It's time we take back our neighborhood, our homes, our streets, our future." The crowd cheered again, but I knew this wasn't the end. The HOA wouldn't just roll over and disappear. They would fight. They would try to spin the narrative, twist the facts, and do whatever they could to save their reputation. But they had already lost. Their grip on this community was slipping away, and no amount of lies could fix that. As I looked around, I saw the faces of my neighbors, people who had been silent for far too long. No, they were united, stronger than ever before. We had power, and we weren't going to let anyone take it away. But I knew one thing. We couldn't just expose them and leave it at that. We had to finish what we started. We had to take down the HOA once and for all. I turned to the reporter. "You've got everything you need, right?" I asked. She nodded, her camera rolling. "We're going to make sure the world knows what they've done," she said. "We're going to take this story as far as it needs to go." And that was it. We had the media on our side. We had the truth. We had the neighborhood behind us. The HOA couldn't stop us now. But as the crowd dispersed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Mrs. Taylor wouldn't give up without a fight. She'd find a way to retaliate. She'd try to smear my name, ruin my reputation. She'd do whatever she could to keep her power. I wasn't worried, though. The neighborhood was on our side. The truth was on our side. And we were ready for whatever came next. As the sun began to set and the crowd started to go home, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The HOA had been exposed, but their influence still lingered. They had made too many enemies, too many deals, and they wouldn't go down without a fight. We had won this round, but the real war was just beginning.